Welcome to One Last Take, a podcast about seeing film from every angle. I'm Wes Skinner, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing the latest in DC's rebranded cinematic universe, a sentimental send-off to America's favorite jackasses, and an underrated martial arts gem you should go check out immediately. Hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the show, where I talk about new theatrical releases and just about anything else I can get around to watching in the past week. We're currently at a very strange point in the summer's offerings, with just a couple movies trickling in through to wide release, and that'll pretty much be the case until July 10th. I'm unfortunately not in an area that received the limited release of Olivia Wilde's The Invite, which is one I've been looking forward to, so we'll have to wait till the wide release to cover that one. On paper, though, this should have been a big week on its own, but the first movie I'm talking about today had such an underwhelming opening and reception that it left things feeling pretty empty. So yeah, we need to kick things off by talking about Supergirl. And I'm being intentional with the phrasing of the word need because these movies are starting to feel like an obligation at this point. And I think it's time for everyone involved in the production of Marvel and DC superheroes to sit down for some kind of intervention. Before I get too far ahead of myself, here's a synopsis of Supergirl. It follows Millie Alcock as the titular Kryptonian, also known as Kara Zor-El, cousin of the beloved Superman. Unlike the Man of Tomorrow, Kara has yet to find her place on Earth, and while still mourning the loss of her home planet, spends her birthday week off-world, traveling from planet to planet and getting drunk with her trusty space dog, Krypto. Meanwhile, a gang of space brigands, led by the villainous Krem, wander the lands wreaking havoc, killing a blacksmith and his family, leaving only his daughter Ruthie to survive. When Ruthie seeks assistance in getting her revenge, she soon crosses paths with Kara, who, after Krypto is poisoned by Krem, reluctantly agrees to join forces and hunt down the brigands. The storyline, based on the beloved Tom King comic run Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, seems to be a streamlining and in turn a sterilization of its source material. While I haven't read it myself, some brief online research has shown me there's a lot more nuance left on the page than this adaptation might suggest, which ultimately ends up being a tired, pastiche-laden slog that feels like kind of a nail in the coffin for the golden era of superhero movies. To be clear, I'm not saying heavy-hitting titles like Spider-Man, The Avengers, and Batman aren't going to continue dominating the box office. Of course they are. But gone are the days of an Ant-Man or Aquaman movie filling every auditorium and creating mass discourse for a week or two. Part of what was so special about the MCU project, at least through Endgame, was that it perfectly replicated the experience of sifting through a graphic novel or limited run of issues just to wait anxiously for whatever that final teaser was hinting towards. It was an exciting, addictive journey led by charismatic stars and writers who seemingly knew how to translate that feeling from one medium to the other with care and love for the source material. That didn't mean slavishly trying to replicate what was on the page, but it was more about simply recreating that feeling it gave the readers. Well, at some point it seems that connecting thread got lost, and James Gunn, amid the upstart of his own new DC universe, had a chance to find it again. But so far, between this and his very own Superman last year, a movie that did well but I liked a little less than most, that disconnect seems to be felt just as much by Gunn and company as it is by Feige and his team at Marvel. Once again, Supergirl follows a cynical would-be hero reluctantly escorting a plucky youth on an adventure that will give them the redemption and closure, respectively, that they're looking for. It is utterly mind-blowing how many times in the last 15 years or so we've been fed a version of this same story, despite studios often having a massive well of source material to pull from. You have Logan, The Last of Us, The Mandalorian, God of War, just to name a few, and it's getting to the point where the quality of the execution is kind of becoming irrelevant because it just feels stale from the get-go. I suppose there's an ounce of nuance to the formula here, with Kara being younger than most characters in the quote-unquote lone wolf role, with the story even being a bit of a coming-of-age for her as well. But while I think Millie Alcock is an incredibly talented dramatic actress, I simply didn't buy the drunken, devil-may-care persona she's forced to wear for most of the film. Playing drunk is incredibly difficult for even the most seasoned of performers, especially while trying to conceal an Australian accent, so I blame the direction more than Alcock herself for why this performance just doesn't feel natural to me. In fact, that sort of echoes throughout most of the performances in the film, with Eve Ridley feeling stilted and a little too Game of Thrones as Ruthie, and Matthias Schoenaerts as Krem doing a Frankenstein showcase of every failed comic book villain over the last 20 years. Even Lobo, an immortal bounty hunter played by the always charming Jason Momoa, feels like a character whose only note on paper was, do Momoa things. But if the characters were the only element that felt undefined, strong world building or a clear sense of tone could have saved this movie from forgettability, but sadly neither of those work very well either. Every location feels like a discard from Guardians of the Galaxy, which does the film no favors as it only reminds the audience of a stronger series of film that they'd probably rather be watching. Meanwhile, the gang of villains, which are part Mad Max war boys and part Russian sex traffickers from outer space, feel both gross and utterly unthreatening. There's a scene where the aforementioned Krem slices the throat of a young girl, but because the movie is edited like a PG-13 movie trying to skate it past the MPA, the viewer doesn't really feel the impact of it either. Pairing these sort of ugly real-world stakes with silly, poorly timed jokes is something Gunn himself is adept at, but in the hands of Cruella director Greg Gillespie, not so much. He's not incapable of making solid movies with the serviceable Fright Night remake and Margot Robbie vehicle I, Tonya under his belt. But Supergirl is an example of a director out of his element and floundering, giving in to every bad impulse because they don't know what to do with the material. In fact, one of those impulses has been earning plenty of headlines on its own, and that's the soundtrack. The songs here play over action scenes not because they enhance the action or highlight the rhythm of its movements, but seemingly to make everything seem more fun and briskly edited than it actually is. Gillespie is a competent director, but action is entirely a different skill set that needs to be honed. You can't just apply basic camera and editing techniques and hope for the best. There's a cadence to it, there are rules, and if you break them, they have to be in interesting ways or the action is going to come off sloppy or disorienting, which unfortunately it often does here. Even general audiences can usually tell the difference between a good action scene and a bad one, and no amount of quirky needle drops is going to fool them. Especially not the already infamous one at the end of this movie during a climactic fight sequence, which is maybe the most baffling choice I've seen on screen all year. Now look, is this movie a total disaster? Not quite, but in the context of DC's attempted renaissance, and at this point in the life cycle of superhero movies as a whole, it's just not enough. Movies like Thor: The Dark World and The Incredible Hulk were forgivable at the time because studios were still trying to find the proper shape of the superhero movie mold. But at this point, there's simply no excuse for the lackluster output of both DC and Marvel right now, especially since they continue to let down the female characters of these rosters. Not every movie is going to be Avengers 2012 or The Dark Knight, and that's okay, but they have to at least have the energy of a Thor Ragnarok, or the heart of a Guardians movie, or the world building of a Black Panther. There has to be something for me to walk away and go, I haven't seen that in a superhero movie yet. And unfortunately, I've seen just about everything Supergirl has to offer in other movies, only much, much better. So here's to hoping Clayface is a nice palate cleanser and that maybe the new DCU as a whole can get a little riskier in the future. Now, we may not have any superheroes in real life, but what we do have is a group of individuals who have tested their physical limits in ways both death-defying and downright disgusting. You could call them the Avengers of Idiocy, or as they're known best, Jackass. Their latest compilation of buffoonery is called Jackass Best and Last, a title that really sums up everything this movie aims to accomplish in just 3 simple words. It's a mix of their most famous, or rather infamous, stunts, brand new material, and a few deep cuts that were never aired during the TV series' original run. For those unfamiliar with Jackass, imagine if Buster Keaton hung out with skater punks who also did stunts, and at least one of them had an addiction to putting stuff up their butt. If that description left you with more questions than answers, it's because Jackass is something that needs to be seen to be believed. It's also something that most people either love and can't get enough of, or absolutely despise. And I guess that's understandable. Now, growing up a millennial, Jackass was the cool taboo thing to watch at a friend's house or at night when the volume was low. Each episode was a seemingly random series of pranks, dangerous stunts, and gross-out gags crammed into a uniquely addicting 25-minute package, all performed by guys who looked like your older brother's stoner friends. As I got older, Jackass became my answer to reality TV. It's been the trashy, comforting thing I watch over the years every once in a while when my mind is too burnt out to process anything more thought-provoking. Instead, the primal part of my brain can take over and just watch grown men in silly outfits find creative ways to hit each other in the crotch or make each other puke. I'm often met with some form of surprise or shock when I tell people that I love this franchise, but I've always found myself compelled and somewhat charmed by the thought and passion they put into something so incredibly stupid on the surface. It'd be easy to say that anyone could do it, but no one else really has, at least not successfully, and definitely not the way these guys have. And it's that commitment that sets them apart. It's the way Johnny Knoxville acts like he's just painted the Sistine Chapel after creating a new room of painful traps. It's the way Chris Pontius shakes his flaccid penis like he's Rocky running up the steps. And it's the way Steve-O's face bears all the weight of an astronaut heading to the moon as he's about to be launched 150 feet into the air while strapped inside of a loaded porta potty. Maybe the ultimate answer to the argument over whether these guys are professionals or idiots is a simple yes. I say all this because Jackass Best and Last is almost impossible to review as a normal movie, even just in comparing it to other installments. It's hard to say that it's truly the best Jackass movie because there is a fair amount of reused footage, but what I might dare to call it is the definitive Jackass movie. If anyone was to go from never seeing a Jackass movie or TV episode in their life, this would introduce them to some of the best bits of the franchise, and would therefore be a sustained level of insanity very few movies or TV shows could ever dream of. The new material has that classic Jackass absurdity, but the age of the original cast shows, with an almost visible disbelief that they're all still doing this after 26 years. While the previous film introduced a new class of Jackass cast members in a way that came off sort of awkward and forced, newer guys like Poopies and Zach Holmes just feel like a part of the family now and are right at home with the antics. Of course, the heart, soul, and weathered bones of Jackass start and end with Johnny Knoxville. And the footage spanning from his reckless youth to his now older, wiser self, reluctantly throwing in the towel on the entire project is the closest thing the movie gets to an emotional arc. And honestly, it works. The film opens on a harrowing, previously unseen clip of a young Johnny out in the woods working himself up to shoot his own chest point blank through a Kevlar vest and a stack of hustlers. An hour and a half of wince-inducing falls and vomit-inducing pranks later, he watches from a safe distance as a dummy dressed up as him is tossed around by a massive explosion, clearly just grateful to still be alive. Maybe it's silly to even be somewhat moved by all this, but I can't deny that I was. Maybe it's that it's a slow week at the movies, or maybe it's because this is such an extreme and ridiculous example of grappling with mortality that it hits even harder. Either way, I had a blast at the movies, and so did the audience I saw it with, and that's more than I can say for the last movie. Given the underwhelming offerings in the theater, this was a perfect week for me to find a movie I'd been waiting for months right there on VOD, and that's Yuen Woo-ping's Blades of the Guardians. Directed by the master behind some of the greatest fight choreography in martial arts movie history, it's no surprise this was my second most anticipated action movie right behind The Furious. Between these two, it's safe to say this year has been a feast for action fans unlike any year in a long time. Based on a Chinese comic series or manhwa of the same name, the film stars Wu Jing as Dao Ma, a bounty hunter on the road with his young nephew, when the two find themselves crossing paths with Zhi Shilong, a famed revolutionary, and are forced to escort him past imperial checkpoints. From there, they encounter various allies and opposition, each with their own agenda, resulting in a chase across the kingdom and many explosive battles. Blades of the Guardians is a sprawling action epic that embraces its comic book roots and intentionally feels like a chapter of a grander story. Unlike The Furious, the fights prioritize an operatic fluidity over hard-hitting violence, using classic wuxia techniques like wirework and heightened choreography that place the story firmly in Fantasyland, despite taking place during a real point in Chinese history known as the Sui Dynasty. And if solid action is what you're looking for, which, let's be honest, that's the only reason you're watching this movie, you're in the right place. But expecting anything less than that from Yuen Woo-ping is kind of like going to a Gordon Ramsay restaurant wondering if the food's going to be good. Think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon meets a Marvel movie, and that's something close to what you have here. Each character feels distinct in their own way, and fittingly feels pulled directly from the panels of a comic, complete with signature weapons and elaborate costumes. Wu Jing turns on his natural charisma as Dao Ma, his face showcasing all the world-weary wisdom and tough guy snark of a Clint Eastwood in his heyday. He's the main character, but not knowing what's going on behind his eyes half the time adds depth that a straightforward stoic approach would leave wanting. The entire ensemble around Jing, which includes a welcome return of the legend Jet Li, is equally compelling, providing all sorts of surprises and character development with their own individual arcs. Chen Li Jun as a badass archer and chieftain's daughter fleeing an arranged marriage is easily my favorite of the bunch. I was surprised at how much I cared about these characters between the punching and kicking, and that's a testament to Yun's understanding of how important it is to have a strong relationship between action and story, especially if you're going to do something this epic and ambitious. The movie's not perfect, however, with an over-reliance on CGI in places and a few instances of sloppy editing where it appears to be masking the limitations of some of the film's older stars, including the aforementioned Lee. Still, if we're sticking with my previous metaphor, even Gordon Ramsay makes a simple cheeseburger every once in a while. But it's still Ramsay, and this is still Yuen Woo-ping. And Yuen continues to do action better at 80 years old than most directors could dream of in their lifetime. So as long as he's cooking, I'll keep showing up to eat. And those are the movies of the week. I'm going to save what I watched outside of the theaters for next week, given it's another quiet one. Between the latest Minions movie by my arch nemesis Illumination Studios to Young Washington by my other least favorite studio, Angel Studios, it's not a week I've been looking forward to. Though I can tell you I've already seen one of these movies, and it may or may not have turned out to be a pleasant surprise. So make sure to tune in next week to find out which one. As always, you can find more of my movie thoughts at one_last_take on Letterboxd, and thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. We'll see you next time.